All right, welcome everybody. It is July 20, tell me if it's the 21st, 24th, what is it? 24th. You're just mentioning prayers. I was going to talk about that tonight, actually. What is the correct way to pray? And I'm not going to get political and I'm not going to get religious, but I'm going to just suggest that it was suggested to us what is the correct way to pray, which is not, as Bob Proctor would say, get on your hands and knees and move your lips. It has a lot to do with the intention, the energy you put in to the situation. I watched an interesting presentation today of someone who almost verbatim, including quoting, drawing the stick person and quoting from Bob Proctor, almost verbatim does the talk that I do on the law of attraction. I was really impressed to see that somebody else had put the same thought process together on it, which included a lot of scientific information from the world of quantum physics. I don't know how many of you have read a book from Bruce Lipton called The Biology of Belief, but what we're starting to see in science and all these talks that have been given over the years and the many interesting books and articles that have been written over the years, over the centuries actually, is there is a strong correlation to the data points now, whereby anyone who has a background in science, who looks and understands things on an objective level and presents information that can be fortified or validated on the merits of its ability to be repeated scientifically. A scientific fact is something that can be repeated and demonstrated versus a theory, which could be a widely held belief. But once validated, verified, then it becomes a scientific fact or a theorem that we can then use for the application of whatever, building rockets, sending people to space, making cell phones, you name it. So I have been somebody who's been a student of metaphysics, which is the science of mind, for decades now. And I do have a background in certain theological practice, and I've diversified that by exposing myself to other forms of theology to see what the correlation points are. Because if there's one God, there's definitely an infinite number of ways to attain godhood, if you will. And if there is such a thing as a divine being that is almighty, all-powerful, all-knowing, all-wise, all-everything, then our mere human interpretation of that divine being must be approached in a very modest way. And hence, and I'll give an example of that. You know, anything that is read must be read by someone. A word, that word must be interpreted by the mind of that someone. So at the end of the day, everything we read and think about and talk about when it comes to these ideas has to move through the mind of man. And so unless you're operating at the level of consciousness of God, it's going to be interpreted at the level of the mind of man. Even that thing we call divine interpretation. So the truth is limited to the mind of man. So I want to talk about this because this is about aligning with success. And last week we talked about some really practical stuff. And today I thought I might sort of go back a little bit to the original thing that drew me to do this call, which was some of the work that I was starting to come out with publicly about the idea of aligning with success being more of a metaphysical process than it is just a practical or physical process. That there's a lot to do with the mind. But I want to expand our concept of that because it's not just your thoughts. That's the misinterpretation where the movie The Secret fell way short of the mark, was because they stripped it out of the heart and the soul of the actual subject. A better movie to watch would be I think they call it Down the Rabbit Hole. You may have heard of it. Down the Rabbit Hole, I think it's called. In any event, I'm going to come at this for a few minutes here just now, talk a little bit about my understanding of how to apply the principles that are taught around the globe on how we can create success. Last week we talked about what's the definition of success. We got clear on the idea that it was a movement toward an ideal that was worthy of our life. Biology of Belief, by the way, the book is by, gosh, my mind is now being called back to that. Hang on a second. You guys, what's the name of the book? Bruce Lipton. Thank you. Bruce Lipton wrote Biology of Belief. In fact, let me just give you a quick blurb on that. He was trained as a medical practitioner. He was actually an educator in medicine. He was called on at the university level to teach in, I think, in the islands. And it wasn't until he studied, one year he took a course in quantum physics, and that was it. That was the, you peel away the consciousness, you can't go back. Well, he peeled away, he got the red pill, and you can't go back once you know how quantum physics works, the nature of quantum physics, quantum reality, the idea that if you continue to zoom in at a higher degree of understanding, meaning you can drop down to the level of an atom and even smaller than that, you start to understand the laws of the universe in a different way, in a more precise way. And at the end of the day, they describe energy. Now, I'll give you an example. You and I are looking at each other on a screen. We see an image of each other. But do you know that 99.999, put 13 nines after that first 9% of what you're looking at is space. Okay, 99.9999, 13 nines. That's how much space you're looking at. Even though you think you're looking at a thing, it's 99.99999, 13 nines, space. And so the majority of everything that we consider something is actually space. And it's not a thing at all. It contains energy and vibration, but it's not a physical thing at all, even though it appears to be. So what we learn is there's a thing called the appearance of things, and then there's what that thing actually is. And this is where it starts to become very, very clear how the law of attraction really works. The fact that it is a physical law. It goes beyond what we believe to be true, what appears to be true, to a much higher understanding of truth. And that higher understanding is that everything is energy. Everything is not only energy, but there's no separation between anything. So even though we appear to be separated by time and space and location, even on this screen, it's an illusion. It's simply an optical illusion. The truth of the matter is everything is energy, and it's just higher concentrations of it and lower concentrations of it, higher organizations of it, lesser organizations of it, but it's a field of energy that permeates all time, all space, and everything you would consider the universe. So that in itself, you could say, if you define God as something that's infinite and whole, that's God, the totality of everything. And so that which we are is something within the context of that whole. We are a small perception, point of perception of that whole. And that which we perceive is so diluted that we can't even recognize how unrecognizable it is, that 99.999% of what we're looking at isn't even being looked at. It's not even here, it's space. So it's just an interesting thing. But to get to the reason why it matters, because there are laws that drive it. There's things that are driving the nature of the reality you're experiencing. The days you're having, the emotions you're having, the results that you're having on a day-by-day basis is actually being created. And it's not something that you were born with. It's something that you're manifesting in real time. There is a delay in what you imagine something to be and its effect, the way it's displayed and outpictured in this thing called the three-dimensional hologram. But that thing where 99 whatever percent is not really here, that small percent that's actually here is the hologram, the thing that we're able to perceive. So how does this thing work? How can we improve our results in Awaken, which is just a result of the many results that we have the health, the state of health of our mind, the state of health of our body. Joe Dispenza, I think there's a name that you might have heard of. Here's a guy who is, in a matter of weeks, was able to heal, literally heal, reconstruct his skeletal system through this knowing, this understanding. And most people might think, well, I don't believe that. That's your choice. And since that's just an arbitrary thing, whether you believe it or not anyway, what difference does it make except to you? So the fact that he did that, and there's testimony after testimony of examples of things like this, especially in his domain, the work that he's been doing, demonstrates that it's not a miracle at all. It's simply an understanding. You know, if a doctor goes in and surgically does something, you don't call it a miracle. You say, the guy knew what he was doing, he did it, he got a result that was consistent with what he thought he would get, and hey, that's great, we're grateful that it went well, and we thank God and all that it all went well. But it's not a miracle. It's definable, it's understandable, and it's repeatable. So if these laws are not creating miracles, they're just creating results, then understanding these laws may appear to be miraculous to some, but they're just simply effects of understanding. And so how can we create more success in ECAN? How can we create more success in our personal experience, in our life, in our health especially? And since these laws are perfect, and our consciousness is not, our perception is not, it's merely a small fragment of what's possible. And I'll give you an example. I mentioned this before. If you and I, all of a sudden, somehow, by some miracle, we had the mind of God, like we literally, boom, there you are, and you see everything from that perspective of awesomeness, of totality, totalness and wholeness. And I mean, you're the sun, you're the moon, you're the stars, you're the constellations, you're all this, you get it all, it's all there, and it's in your consciousness. What would you believe to be true? I asked my daughter at dinner tonight that question. What would you, if you were in the mind of God right now, if you're one with God and your mind was operating at that level of consciousness, what would you believe to be true? Now, what would be your answer? Somebody was speaking, but you're muted. Do you have an answer? What would you believe to be true if you had the consciousness of the Creator? Lori?
Have to believe it to be all.
What was that, Barbara?
You would have to believe it to be all true.
You would have to believe it to be, wait, what would you believe to be true? All? Everything? You believe everything to be true.
If God was the be all and the end all,
if you were in that mind,
Creator, yes, you believe it all to be true.
Everything. Every belief that every human being holds, every religion, every notion, every thought, everything, you would believe to be true.
It was created.
Even if they were contradictory. That doesn't seem to make sense. Or maybe it does. If you were the Almighty, infinite, what would you believe to be true? What beliefs would you have? Yes, Suzanne.
That anything is possible.
Therefore, you would have what belief?
An unshakable belief.
One.
Well, what is a belief?
What you perceive to be true.
What you perceive to be true. But if you perceive everything, then you would have no belief at all. Because it would be redundant. It would be absolute, everything would be redundant to you. Because belief is a limiting idea. It's a perspective. You have to hold on to it to have a belief. You have to actually define it and say, this is such and such. Or this is so, this is a fact. This is what I believe to be true. But if you were the Almighty, that's just one point of an infinite number of points.
I guess I misunderstood the context in the beginning.
That's okay. That's okay. It's not a right or wrong. It's just a question to get you to think for a second, which means that the more we believe and the more we hold on to those beliefs, the further away we are from the infinite mind. So the more rigid we are in our thinking, the more rigid we are in our beliefs, we are fixing our mind to, or transfixing our mind to a certain nature, a certain outcome, a certain result, a certain perspective, a certain point of view, and a certain operating system within which there can only be so many results. But if we want to open up to results that we've not experienced, then how valuable are those beliefs if those beliefs don't open us up to those possibilities? So truthfully, belief is actually an experience of a sort that we hold in our memory, whether it's our own or it's our planets or the past beings that were on this planet who taught us. In other words, we've adopted a bunch of ideas that we hold on to give ourselves comfort and identity in order to operate within the system that we've identified ourselves with, to be comfortable within that system, recognized, honored, respected, whatever. But they are nothing but a system of beliefs holding that system together. But in the mind of God, the infinite, is anyone more important than the other?
Oh.
They're redundant to the mind of God, which is infinite. So as we go on trying to define God, we always use the words the non-definable, the infinite, and so forth. And then we go around and create a system of beliefs that lock him into certain ways of thinking. So it's a contradictory position. What does this have to do with success? What it has to do with is you are currently a success. You are right now a perfect representation of who you are being, of what you believe to be true, what you're holding on to as truth. It is being deliberated or delivered to you on a platter with what you call your life and your life experience and your life story. So your current reality is a mirror or a reflection of everything you are holding on to as a reflection of who you think you are and who you think everyone else is and what you think is true about everything. And yet from that place, you're trying to create a new reality. Do you see the contradiction? The contradiction is you can't operate in a new space because you're limited by the one that you're in. So in order to make that shift, we have to shift our consciousness. We have to shift what we're willing to believe and accept to be true about ourselves, others, our circumstances, etc. Whatever it is that we define our truth to be, we have to shift it in order to experience a new truth.
So when Bob Proctor, your paradigm, it's letting go of those paradigms. It's another term to talk about whatever paradigm we're stuck in, to move out of it, to become more infinite, to expand our paradigm and not hold on to all those old truths.
Yeah, and the tricky part is, do we even know what we're holding on to? So it's a tough situation because we're told that is what we have to change, but we don't even know what that is. We don't know what it is that's holding us back from the windfall that we could clearly be experiencing if somehow we were able to let go of that rock. So what is the way through this? And I heard something today, and I heard Bob Proctor say this many times before, space repetition. One of the ways that we can reprogram that the synapses in our brain is nothing but a computer that's soft and malleable, and it's been basically shaped by our thought processes and what we've held on to as truths through the beginning of our life. But it's also shaped by the experiences of our life, which include, by the way, it's not limited to just thoughts, it's the emotions. It creates engrams. And engrams are a combination of a thought and an emotion. It's the combination of a thought and an emotion. They're not separate. So a thought without emotion produces nothing. An emotion without a thought is not conscious. So we have to have deliberate thoughts that have emotions associated with it to produce a result. So the results that we're getting in our life right now are thoughts and emotions. And they're thoughts and emotions that are stored within our being. Most often we call and refer to as the subconscious mind. So if we're going to shift that, we have to shift that. How do we overwrite those beliefs that we don't even know we have that are somehow holding us back? Well, we have to just create a belief that we want to hold. And since all beliefs, every single one of them that you hold is arbitrary. You can choose to hold it. You can choose to reject it. That's your choice. That's what makes it arbitrary. So since we can choose a belief to hold on to and reinforce and create the emotion and the synapses so that we can create a strong impression, if you will, in the subconscious mind that can overwrite the old impressions, then that's where the concept of goals and affirmations come in. We set a goal, and then we create an affirmation around who would we have to be if we achieve that goal? Who would I have to be to have achieved such a goal? And you define that person as a real person, and you label yourself as that person. I'm a great speaker. I attract wonderful people into my life. Those are the affirmations that would be consistent with somebody who is succeeding, for instance, and you can. So I attract a lot of referrals because people know what I've got is good. You'd have to think that about yourself, and more importantly, believe that about yourself. In other words, emotionalize that thought in order for that to become the experience. So you can choose that. That's one of the things that you can do. The other thing that causes us to form our beliefs that affect us are shock. We can be shocked into a situation. It could be an instant in time. Something happens, but has such a profound emotional impact on us that little spike in reality, for instance, post-traumatic stress disorder, or what do they call it? Post-traumatic.
PTSD.
Right. Okay. That, for instance, a warrior goes to war, a soldier goes to war, and a bomb goes off. That's an instant in time, but it can have such a profound effect emotionally. They live with it the rest of their life. So it's the combination of an idea and its emotion that creates the impact that then becomes our externalized experience.
They collide.
No, they don't collide. They work together.
Okay.
There are two parts of the two ingredients of the thing that shapes our belief system, that shapes our reality. So we want to get our thoughts and our emotions aligned to what it is that we really want to experience. Who do we have to be to experience the life that we want to have? If you want money in your bank account, if you want to start seeing cash flow to you and not out of you, coming toward you in abundance so that you have more coming in than you have coming out, that is a condition of your mind. It is not a condition of your circumstances. You have the vehicle, so clearly it's a condition of the mind. So yes, act as if, but it's so much more when you look at it from an emotional level, because there's going to be competing emotions. Let's say, for instance, money was a problem in somebody important to you in your life, and somehow on some subconscious level, you've associated money with something not so good. And yet here you are wanting to succeed, wanting to have that cash flow, but that underlying subconscious thing is working against you. How do we overwrite that program? We got to get emotionally involved in the new idea. So repetition is a way to create the impression, to rewire the brain so that it starts to associate your identity to that new identification. So repetition. Again, the other way is shock. Now, I'm not exactly sure how to shock you into this. We normally experience shock in a very negative way. We experience a traumatic experience that's a shocking thing to our nervous system, and that sits with us. You might be driving your car and all of a sudden you hear a sound, and that sound causes you to just shake in your boots, and you don't understand what happened. It's because that sound, that engram, is somewhere in the subconscious mind reminding you of something that was very disturbing or very uncomfortable. Is there a way to shock you in a positive way, to create a positive experience? Well, one of the things you can do, again, in terms of shock, is a short-term thing, but with tons of emotion. So one of those things I've found in our business that has a similar effect is an event. An event is like a 1 or 2 or 3 day thing where there's a ton of energy and emotion, and that creates an impression. And that impression fills you up and fortifies you, overriding beliefs that are maybe undermining you. So with the regularity of an event, like our main events, that's a huge way to create impact on a subconscious level. Because if you've been to one, you know, for 2-3 days, you are higher than a kite. It's true. And no drugs needed. I mean, this is all natural hype. So this is us doing it to ourselves. And we have an event coming up in 90 days. So how clear are you about your objectives where that event is concerned for you and the people you want to have in the business succeeding alongside with you? How important have you made it to put this on the agenda and promote this? Because that is one of those shock factors that has an effect on the subconscious mind. And let's not kid ourselves. In order for you to experience a new reality, we have to program ourselves, reprogram ourselves. Now, the books that I'm big fan of, I've become the biggest fan of, the author that I think has done the best in the work in the 25 years I've been reading stuff from Thomas Trorwood at the turn of the century until recent, is Neville. And he speaks in a language I appreciate and understand, and he does use a lot of references to biblical passages, which I really, really like, because so many people are so locked in on the Bible as the Word of God, the sacred truth and so forth. Well, that's good. If you believe that, that's great, because then to hear the interpretation in a way that's clear and applicable today in your life right now, where you can actually create a result, that's even more powerful. So I love this work because it really helps put horsepower into the words. So people aren't believing in a superstitious God, but they're believing in a God that's just and a God that operates by law and not by whim. So this author, he talks a lot about how to deal with the reprogramming process in a way that is the most profound I've seen so far. He goes into it in terms of, how do I emotionalize an experience? Well, we have this thing called our imagination, this brilliant faculty that we have, which enables us to actually close our eyes at any time of the day or night, and we can see something in our mind that we're not experiencing in our reality. We can imagine something that has not even been experienced on planet Earth. I mean, that's the most amazing thing about our imagination, is it really taps into a possibility field that we aren't even, that we even have no belief system around. So the imagination is the most profound aspect of human consciousness, because it can imagine outside the belief system that we hold and that even the humankind holds. We can imagine beyond it. And if you're really good at it, they call that prayer. And that's how we kind of started this dialogue. How do you pray? So what is the art of praying? What is the purpose of praying? It's not to ask for Santa Claus in the sky to give you favors. That's just ludicrous. It's to recognize that it's a lawful process by which we are able to create and co-create with our Creator a reality, experience a new reality. There has to be an interchange, an exchange of energy and information in order for that to become a reality. Because if the provider is providing us with our current reality based on those laws, then understanding those laws and asking for what it is that we really want in the manner that we need to be doing that would provide us with the result that we're seeking. Because a lot of people pray their whole life and get nowhere, don't get any results. And the reason is because they're not really praying. They're just moving their lips and not really putting in the energy that's being required of them, which is pretty straightforward because it's been explained. And this energy I'm talking about is ask, but ask in a manner that's very deliberate. You ask as though you have received it. How would you ask for something you've already received? How would that conversation in your mind go with your creator? What would it look like? What would it say? What would it start with? And that's the conversation of assumption. You would have to make the assumption that you are that person receiving the benefit for which you're asking. Well, the first thing you have to ask yourself is, are you worthy of it? And even if you have to ask that question of yourself, you know you've got a problem in your belief system. The fact that you would even need to ask that question, am I worthy? Do I feel I'm worthy? Tells you where your flaw is in your belief. That you can actually consider yourself unworthy is a flaw in your belief. And that's the first thing I would go after. So yes, start with thank you, says Lori. The first thing you would ask or you would say is thank you. So thank you or thankfulness is the energy. It's a gratitude. That is a vibration. How do you feel when you're thankful? I mean, we know it. We felt it. We've had this experience. So you know you're praying properly if the feeling you are feeling is gratitude. If that's not what you're feeling, you are not praying. You're just moving your lips, talking to Santa Claus. But if you're feeling gratitude, that's praying. When you're grateful, that's the first thing that hooks you up, plugs you in to the universal mind of all, is the experience and the feeling of gratitude. So from there, you can ask for whatever you want, as if it has already been received. And as Lori says, in God's timeline, it is already done. So let me explain that from a physics point of view as a scientist. In the infinite probability field, or in the infinite possibility field, everything is possible. Not necessarily probable, but most certainly possible. What makes anything probable is how likely are you to experience that? Well, let me give an example. If you never fly on an airplane, is it possible for you to crash on an airplane? Yes, because the possibility is you could crash in an airplane. But if you never fly, the probability is very low. So we create the probability, and we increase the probability of something happening when we get very clear and very focused on what it is that we're asking for, and if we're praying for it in a manner that's consistent with the law, which is a vibration, a frequency. It's a feeling. You have to feel as if that thing is already done. And this is what he describes, by the way, in his many dissertations. He talks about, is there a way that you as a human being can actually turn that on in a flash and create this boom, this engram of emotion that is so profound that you actually create that reality. And so he says that there's a way to do it. And here's the technique that he describes. He says, do it when you're about to go to sleep, because that's when you're most susceptible. That's when you're letting go. Your conscious mind is letting go of the day, of the reality you call life, of all the beliefs and so forth that are supporting that reality, all the identities. When you're about to fall asleep, you just fall asleep and you lose whoever you are and you go into some dream state, right? So in that very vulnerable place, you're detaching from this world, which is an important thing, which is why people meditate. The purpose of meditation is to clear the mind, get into the present, which means to disconnect from all your fears of the future and all your anxieties of the past, to get into the moment of the present. And in that moment, everything is incredible. It's beautiful because life is. And so there's no judgment in the moment. There is no judgment in the present. Judge not. So get to the present state. You won't have time to judge because there is no time. So in this very vulnerable state before you go to sleep, imagine something. Imagine a reality that is what you want to experience. He says, don't imagine a film like the whole beginning, the middle, of the end, and all that stuff. just a moment in time, because the more clear you get on this image, the more probable the situation. So get very, very specific. And he'll give you an example, like, let's say you're looking for a promotion. What would have happened after that promotion that would only have happened had you had the promotion? What would have happened after the promotion that could only have happened had you had the promotion? That's the moment you want to lock in on. Your boss shaking your hand, and the weight of their hand in your hand, and the temperature of their hand in their hand, and the tie that they're wearing, or their glasses that they're wearing, or whatever. That moment in time that you can lock in on, that is so that you can imagine very clearly, like the director of a script, very clearly imagine that image. Lock in on that image. Imagine it so vividly, get involved in it so vividly that you can actually feel the feelings of being in the body of the person in that moment. If you can do that, what you're actually doing is jumping into a new timeline. The quantum mechanics world, the quantum physics world tells you that an electron can be in this state, or it can be in this state, or it can be in this state, depending on the energy that's holding. It can jump into higher states and lower states of vibration, depending on the energy. And it doesn't transition. It doesn't go from here slowly transitioning. It literally quantum leaps. It goes from here to here instantly. It doesn't transition through it. It quantum leaps. So you're going to quantum leap into a new reality, because you're going to imagine something so vividly that you're going to feel it. And I'll tell you I've done this, and I'll tell you how you'll know that you've done it. Because you will actually feel it. All of a sudden, you will feel in your body as if you're there. Like, that's it. There's no you imagining. It's just you in that moment. When you get to that place, and if you don't do it the first time, that's okay. You might have to practice this a few nights in a row. But when you get there, I promise you, you will know, because you will have experienced it. You'll experience the feeling of it. And it's so incredible that there's no mistaking it. At that moment, what you have done is you've literally jumped a quantum state into a new reality. Now, there's only one other part to this process for you to see the experience come to fruition. Live as if that is the truth. If you live as if that is the truth and do not cast doubt on it, it must, by law and the virtue of the laws of what has been put in motion, the physical laws of this universe, come to pass. Because that is the commandment. Those are the commandments. Whatever you ask as though you have received them, you shall receive them. And so the process, and look not, you don't want to look back and become this pillar of salt. That's the whole expression of that. If you look back, you go back to the person you were. Don't tell anybody, because they're going to tell you that's not the truth, and you don't want to hear that. That's not important. So you have to take this gap in time between what you've sown in the middle of the night in your bed, just before you go off to bed to sleep. You've sown a new reality, and then you're going to wake up in the morning and you're going to go and experience what appears to be the same reality. It appears to be that. But let me tell you something about reality. 99.999 and 13.9 after that is space. It's not reality. So what you've created in that space is a new reality that must physically manifest into form according to the laws of physics. So all you have to do is remain faithful to that new reality. How does one become faithful to a new reality? How do you do it?
Got to let go of the old reality. For what first step? You really got to let go of the old paradigm. And then I think practice, visualizing over and over again, making the positive affirmation statements.
Repetition.
Listening, the repetition, the new thinking.
Well, let me ask you something.
Focus on the
Hang on. This is really important. Okay, somebody just said the right answer. Just hold this for a second. If you are still making references to the old reality, that means you're looking back. There is no old reality. There is only the reality that you have now sown. That's the only reality that can exist in your conscious state, regardless of what appears to be the circumstances of your old reality. Why is there an old reality when I've sown a new reality? Because it turns out there's another law. And it's this law that confuses people, but it's a law that safeguards them.
Mike, is this something like the deja vu that sometimes people experience? You know you haven't been to a place, but you find yourself in a situation or in a place. You know what's being said. You recognize everything around you, and yet physically you know you've never been there.
That's very, very likely an experience. Yeah, a hologramic experience. So you've jumped into the future. You've now met the future's now met you in the present. Okay, so let me just explain this gap in time. It's really important you appreciate and respect this gap in time. And this gap in time, as I said, is a security measure. Can you imagine what this planet would be like if everything you imagined came to pass instantly? It would be chaos. There's 7 billion people with thoughts, random thoughts, all day long. Many of them are very emotional. The guy who cuts you off, how emotional do you get on that moment? Man, that car would blow up in front of you if you know what I'm saying? Like the reality. So to make this world work, there has to be this gap in time, the law of the harvest, a time to sow, a time to reap. That's the thing that's necessary in order to make this reality work. And so that time to reap comes with the passing of a lawful process, the germination of that seed. You plant the seed in the ground, it doesn't sprout instantly. You just water it, and you water it because you assume it's growing. You assume the seed needs the water. You don't water it because you're hoping it's growing. You water it because you think it's growing. You operate according to that understanding. No differently, you operate according to this understanding. What you have sown. When you feel the feeling that you felt, I'm telling you right now, you will know because you will feel the feeling. And when you feel that feeling, just remain faithful to it. That's it. Remain faithful to the knowledge that you have now given birth in an alternate reality, this new circumstance in your life, which, according to the law of gender, the law of the harvest, must come to pass if you remain faithful, which simply means don't contradict that reality with any thoughts and any emotions that are contradictory. You simply reject them like you would a food item that you don't want to eat. You simply reject them. That is not a condition of my new reality. That is not who I am.
So accept and embrace the new reality.
100% accept and embrace the new reality. The hardest part, by the way, for you guys, you know what it's going to be? Figuring out what you want and getting really clear about it, so clear that you can lock in on an image and get that image so vivid in your imagination that you can actually emotionally experience it. And by the way, it happens in an instant.
Mike, this whole subject is such a powerful one, and I don't know how it happened, but the other day I was watching a YouTube video. I don't know how I got to it, on the law of attraction, and it occurred to me that our energy as a group affects what's going on with us as a group. There was a reference in that video to the war in Lebanon, and they somehow were able to track they use the word meditation, but I know that when something's going on, we in the Jewish community say the book of Psalms in the original language, not the street language that we hear on the street here in Israel, but the original language. And they tracked the success and what was going on in the war in Lebanon to the number of people who were involved together in this process. We have different groups for different things, and I belong to several. And we divide up the entire book of Psalms, and we say certain parts of it so that every day we're saying collectively the entire book of Psalms in the original language. And we understand that God doesn't, there is no past, present, and future in God's time. There is no time. That's for us. So that energy, if you will, is on a different plane. But when we somehow can tap into that energy as a group, and you mentioned events, and the energy of events, it occurred to me that if we somehow can focus on these laws as a group, that it's going to affect our success as a group. Where
two or more are gathered is an exponential effect.
The what?
There's the passage where two or more are gathered in my name. There's an exponential effect. So you are absolutely correct, Mrs. Kramer. The study that was done repeatedly, by the way, where prayer and meditation was employed in order to affect world peace, and they monitored the numbers. The numbers went down 70%, by the way. Crime rate went down 70% globally during these two experiments that lasted 6 months. And the number is the square root of 1% of the population of the group that you're looking to affect. So the square root of 1%. It's a very, very small number of people. So if you take, let's say you want to affect a population of 5 million, take the square root of 1% of the 5 million. So take 1% of 5 million and then take the square root of that. That's the number of people who could affect the entire consciousness of that population. So it's never been on this planet, never, where there's more avatars and spiritual masters than needed at any one time in order to keep the movement of consciousness going forward. But can you imagine if every one of us picked up a little piece of the responsibility and contributed? It's that pebble in the rock, the pebble in the pond concept that I keep talking about. So if all of us on this call begin to experience a new level of consciousness concerning each other and the success of this group. So one of the things that you can imagine is the victories of the people on this call, of this group. That could be part of what you imagine as your new reality. And that contributes to the whole, because that is the law on an exponential level. But what is really important, what I want to really emphasize here today, is something that is missed. And it's the part that requires the most effort. It's the emotion. It's the emotion that's necessary in order to make a prayer effective. It's the emotion. What is the vibration? What is the frequency that you are projecting the idea with? What are you supporting that idea? What's the frequency? If it's desperation, to them that have, more will be given, and to them that have not, more will be taken. That is the law. So if you're coming at it from desperation, you're going to get more desperate. You've got to come at it from abundance. You've got to come at it from gratitude. That's how you get more of that. And it's simply a law. God doesn't choose sides. He just created the law. We choose sides.
There is a law that that the subconscious mind doesn't know the difference between fact and fiction. And whatever we tell it with passion,
correct,
is what it acts on.
hence the emotion. So we've got to get clear. We've got to give ourselves clear direction where that's concerned. And the last piece of this would be guard against the ideas that are competing with you, the ideas that are being pushed upon you from social media, from news and 24-hour news, that's trying to hijack your mind and socially and consciously manipulate you into a state of disarray. Guard against the things that are coming at you that take you vibrationally off course, because they absolutely are effective. And so your reality doesn't have to be the reality of your neighbor, regardless of what's going on in the neighborhood. So, little intense tonight, but I just felt the need to, get back to some of these higher calls, these higher concepts, because the results deserve it, and we deserve better results, and that means we've got to get better at not the mechanics of what we do, but the energy behind those mechanics.
Thanks, Michael.
Alrighty, you guys, thanks for being on the call, joining us, and let some of this digest, because I'd like to get your feedback next week on how this has worked out for you. Last couple of weeks, we talked about success, orienting ourselves around that. We're now talking about implementing it at a higher level. And a vibrational shift is an instantaneous moment in time that can affect reality. So let's talk about this and the new reality next week.
Mike?
Yes.
This is Barb Satterwhite, and I just have to share something. I found this book in a consignment. It's called Creative Mind and Success by Ernest Holmes.
Great writer.
And it was first written in 1919. This is the 1957 revised version. And just today I was reading it. I mean, your whole concept about you have to accept. You have to, in order to believe, you have to accept what you believe. And if I could just read a couple things, is that okay? Sure. It says here, when Jesus says, all things whatsoever you pray and ask for, believe that you receive them and you shall receive them. He was uttering one of those many deep truths that we so clear to him, and that we are just beginning to see. He knew that everything is made out of mind, and that without positive acceptance on the part of the individual, there is no mold into which the mind can pour itself into that form. In the mind of God, there is the correct mold, the true knowing, but in the mind of man, there is not always this true knowing. Since God can do for us only by doing through us, nothing can be done for us unless we are positively receptive. And then it just goes on to say, the reason we can make requests without our requests known with thanksgiving is because we know from the beginning that we are to receive, and therefore we cannot help but being thankful. This grateful attitude of spirit puts us in the very close touch with the power and adds much to the reality of the thing we're dealing with. Without it, we can do little. So let us cultivate all the gratitude we can. In gratitude, we will send our thoughts out to the world, and it comes back. It will come and comes back. It will come laden with fruits of the spirit. And I just think it's fascinating. 1919, but. In the same sense, there's another thing, Signs of the Mind, that I was just reading again on faith tells us what we can do. Fear tells us what we cannot do. Our faith grows with practice. We receive exactly what we expect. And you've been saying this. So even if we speak beautiful words that flow from our tongues, if we don't expect a demonstration, we'll not receive it.
Beautiful.
So,
if we don't expect a demonstration, if you have no faith in the law, you won't receive it. Fantastic. Excellent stuff. And it's not new, right? It's just necessary that we review it more often than not.
Right.
All right, guys. Have a wonderful week.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike.